And welcome inside the Sports Guys podcast here for the last show of 2022. Looking forward to this one for quite some time as we're presented by our friends over at Bangtail Whiskey. It's the drink of choice for your holiday season. I'll be raising a glass tonight and through the Christmas holidays. Bangtail.com and, of course, at easyliquor.com to get that bottle sent directly to your door. And, of course, it's been a while since we've had a show, but, I was like, all this baseball stuff and maneuvering going on and free agency and this frenzy in MLB. I said, I got to invite on one of my good buddies out of CHGO Sports because he's got a lot of the same takes I do. He's very smart. He's very educated about Major League Baseball. We're just 99 days from opening day. And pleased to welcome in my good buddy from CHGO Sports, Cody Delmendo. Cody, what's up, man?
I'm good, Brandon. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you reaching out and, all the support you've given us since we linked up.
No doubt, brother. Hey, let's talk about this. The big news of the day, at least like one of the big stories out there, was Dansby Swanson putting on that Chicago Cubs jersey for the first time today. 7 years. Holy crap, the money. 177 over a 7-year span. Man, this is a great, exciting time for the Cubs before they hit Mesa, Arizona, where they start their spring training out there too. David Ross has to be excited, the whole Cubs organization. Give me your take on just kind of this early grade, if you will, for the Cubs offseason with Dansby being the big news today.
Well, I'll say before Swanson signed, it was looking like an F, but he moves it up to a C at this point. The Cubs still have, I would say, for it to be an A offseason, I would say they need to sign at least 2 or 3 more players, 2 of them being position players and maybe 1 more pitcher. I can talk myself into it, vice versa, you know what I mean? But I think the Cubs still need more offense. Swanson's definitely great defensively. He definitely brings some power. But let's be real, the other 3 guys who signed, they've proven it a lot more as an overall player. Swanson might be the best defensive player out of all 4 of them, but I would say that, as far as offense, he's probably ranking at the bottom out of the 4. So, again, not complaining about it. I'm glad. All I asked for, if you listen to CHGO Cubs podcast, that I just wanted 1, and I got the 1, and so as a fan, I'm pretty happy with it. But now that's the Cubs have to make a few more moves. They added Cody Bellinger and they've added Jamison Taillon. And then they've added a few, guys that I've never heard of in my life. There's a guy from Tampa Bay that I still can't say his last name. He's more of like a utility infielder. He's going to be on the team probably. They've added a few relievers. They signed Brad Boxberger as one of them. But yeah, they need at least 2 more bats in my opinion. And then maybe I can grade it as an A, but for right now, I'd give it a C, and with a lot of upside. There's a lot of upside with this team, and given how the last few years have gone, I'll say that I'll take this over what I've had to endure the last couple years.
Yeah, and I will say that, coming from that, can't believe it's been 6 years since the World Series championship, and all those pieces that were there, those homegrown guys that are elsewhere now, Wilson Contreras, Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant. I mean, that whole nucleus of players. Let's talk about just how far a 6-year span can go in baseball, because we all know how tough this is to repeat as champions or to stay competitive and be in the top, 12 to make the playoffs now with this extended wild card format and what have you. The Cubs, I know the Ricketts family has always been, I guess, kind of like a Steve Cohen now. I've got money in my back pocket. It's burning a hole in it, and I want to spend it. And so now I see the pieces coming back, but I'm kind of the guy, my team being the Houston Astros down here, that have had this window and may have it for another couple of years. You draft, you scout, and you develop players. I think that's the formula for me to winning. So what I'm getting at is they did that. They won that championship in 2016. I remember those pieces like it was yesterday. All the homegrown talent. I like the Bellinger move. I thought Houston would kind of be in on him. Nico Horner is a great ball player. Patrick Wisdom, Ian Happ. Got some of those pieces now that are homegrown. I'm kind of with you on the 6-year gap. I'm kind of wondering, what went wrong? Every team rebuilds. But what do you think the main factor or main factors were that the Cubs fell off after the championship year?
Well, I mean, you said it perfectly when it comes to like player development and drafting. Well, the Cubs, they drafted well at the beginning of their last rebuild when Theo Epstein took over for the Cubs as was a vice president of baseball operations. He drafted Chris Bryant, he drafted Kyle Schwarber, he drafted Ian Happ, he drafted he didn't draft, but he traded for Addison Russell, he traded for Anthony Rizzo. He made a lot of great moves. And then when they won the World Series, the offseason before that, they signed Jason Hayward, they signed Ben Zobrist, and they signed John Lackey. And the offseason before that, going into 2015, that really propelled them was when they signed John Lester, which was kind of like the signal of how that team was going to, be a force, be a contender, and not only the National League, but just for something, for a World Series or something of sorts. That was the plan. And it worked out, right? But how it came apart, and this goes back to what I was saying, what you said about drafting and player development, was that they really struggled at developing pitching. They tried multiple times to draft a pitcher in the first round or early rounds, and if you just go look at 2017, 2016, 27 MLB drafts, of course at that time the Cubs were good and they were getting by with what they had. They basically bought their pitching and grew their bats, but they just could not develop the pitching, and they really didn't start drafting well on the pitching side until I would say 2018 or 2019. But there's just like a small gap in there where they just couldn't develop any pitching. And honestly, even before Theo Epstein was with the Cubs, the Cubs had really struggled to develop pitching as well. I mean, last season, Caleb Killian made his major league debut with the Cubs, who was one of the pieces that came back for Chris Bryant. And I mean, I remember just being excited about having a pitcher to get excited about, that the Cubs homegrown themselves. And it was like the first time I felt like that since like Mark Pryor was on the mound.
Yeah.
So it's been a very long time really since the Cubs had done any really major, developing as far as pitchers. And, I think it's more than just that too, but they just really struggled at developing talent from the 2018 to 2020 time. And then, you talk about the Ricketts having money and stuff. You talk to Cubs fans, man, people think this guy's cheap. I think that he's invested a lot of money in and around the ballpark. He's invested money in a lot of things. He did, let Theo and Jed spend all the money to help them get the World Series, or, get to a World Series and win it all. And after the 2018 season, like, the Cubs stopped spending money. It was the offseason where Bryce Harper and Manny Machado were available, and they weren't even really serious contenders for him, and they should have been. You look at those contracts now for the Padres and Phillies, and you're probably thinking, wow, those are huge steals for both of those teams, considering how much money they're making a year. The Cubs, for as much money as they make, as much money as they're worth, they should have been part of those conversations at the very least, and they weren't. And a lot of it had to do with the ownership closing the pocketbook, and didn't make any sense because the Cubs were coming off a 95-win season. Unfortunately, had to play in the wild card game because the Brewers won by one game. That came down to game 163 at the end of 2018. It was a heartbreaking end of a year, honestly. But they didn't really do anything to try and shake up the roster, or put the team over the top to try and get back to even get back to the playoffs the next year, in my opinion. And they didn't make the playoffs in 2019, and then 2019 offseason going into 2020, they didn't really do much of anything there either. As far as free agency, they didn't even make any trades. As a fan, I was asking for them to just make a trade. If you got to trade a Schwarber now, or if if you're not going to re-sign Chris Bryant, trade him. Like, you got to do something, and they didn't. And Jed Hoyer has actually been very open ever since he's became the vice president of baseball operations, and saying that, realizing that they held on to what they called the core way too long. And that's that is what it is. Hindsight is 2020 now, but I think honestly from the 2018 offseason till last season, going into last season, the ownership acted extremely cheap. The fan base believed that, and the reason that the fan base cared and was mad about it is because the Cubs are one of the most profitable franchises in baseball, and they charge one of the most expensive experiences in baseball. You can Google that right now. Most expensive experiences in baseball, and I think it's the Cubs and Red Sox right there, top 1 and 2. And before the Cubs signed Swanson the other day, I mean, the off seasons for both these teams looked like they were on the same trajectory of just being really cheap, and not doing what it takes, doing everything it takes to put a winner out there. And again, if you want to act that way, if you don't want to be in on the top free agents, well, then you can't charge tickets, and you can't charge tickets for an insane price on top of $13 beers in the bleachers at Wrigley Field, and all this type of stuff. That's just not how good business works. And we saw that last year. This past season, the Cubs weren't good, and they had a drop in ticket sales. They had their lowest ticket sales since 1997.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, the Swanson signing, not only does it help the team, but it definitely, gives some faith back into ownership in the front office, because things weren't looking good. A lot of people didn't understand the direction that Jed Hoyer was taking, especially after he traded Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, and Javi Baez, all three guys that the fan base absolutely adored. One, because they won the World Series, but two, they're good baseball players. And the fact that the Cubs couldn't find a way to extend even one of them, unless the Cubs, win the World Series in this next era with Swanson or whatever, it's probably going to be something that I'm probably always going to think that they messed up in terms of they could have found a way to keep one. But, if you look at those trades right now for all three of those guys, all three of them look good in the Cubs' favor in terms of the potential that some of those prospects can bring. But again, when you're the Cubs and you have all this money to spend and to not even try to keep one of your core players, I feel like Anthony Rizzo was the one that everyone always thought was going to be here. But you know what I mean? Like he's not. And a lot of, again, the fan base was just angry about it and everything. So, it was tough times, but the Swanson deal definitely gets the fan base excited. And I think there's a lot of potential for next season in terms of, at least being in the conversation for the playoffs.
I agree. I think that National League Central is kind of wide open. You never know what's going to happen in that particular division, one of the most competitive ones in baseball. I also look at what happened. I wake up this morning and I get this text from a friend of mine, and he goes, Carlos Correa has spurned the San Francisco Giants and now signed a 12-year, minus 1 year, 12-year $315 with the Mets. And I started going, WTF? That was the first three letters that come to mind. And I went, wow, this is okay. 13 and 350 and then 12 and 315. The numbers kind of add up. Now, let me say this about the Giant fans. I'm going to spring training in Arizona in March. I'll be in Mesa. I have a little condo in Scottsdale. My family goes out there. We enjoy it, have a great time, play golf, swim, do the whole 9 yards. Correa's not a Giant. Woke up today and I went, so I have no reason to go see a bunch of aging veterans now, like a Jock Peterson and some other guys out there. Brandon Crawford, 36. No offense out there. Good baseball players. But I want to go see Dansby Swanson, the Cubs and Mesa, the youth, kind of like my team, the Astros, because I have, a little bit of affiliation there back to the 90s when they were back in the National League Central Division. Question to you is, Steve Cohen now is, like I said, burning a hole in his pocket. This money out here, this whole thing. Yeah. We were going to swoop in. We're going to offer $300. Baseball world is kind of pissed off now. But let me say this. I'm not going to say Cohen's good or bad for the game. It's his money. He's worth, $20 billion. He can do whatever the hell he wants. My point is, though, is this a good thing, in your opinion, for baseball? Because I think I'd like to say where we have parity in football. There's a little bit of parity now more in the NBA with these super teams kind of being, disengaged a little bit. But for baseball, yeah, it's going to be cool to see Lindor and Correa play on the left side, no doubt. Is Steve Cohen good for Major League Baseball?
I think it is, because it's only going to make these owners for these cheap organizations, look even worse. I'm talking about the Oakland Athletics or of the
Yep.
world, and the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates, and there's a few other ones. I would say the Rays, but the Rays at least win every year. Like, they're in it, like the way that they do things, they know they're small market. So, they're very analytically sound. And as much as, I think every team in the league should be spending whatever it takes to make their teams better, there's just, Tampa Bay is not Chicago, right? So,
Sure.
I get it from that standpoint. But, again, like, I don't know if these numbers are right. Like, I don't know if this is actually correct, but I bet you could take Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Oakland, put those payrolls together, and I'm pretty sure that it still might be less than the Mets payroll now. You know what I mean? Or if it's
Yeah.
not, then it's like right there. But to me, is Steve Cohen good for baseball? I think so, because he's acting like an owner that everyone, I feel like every baseball fan, or just every sports fan, would want. Like, and this is coming from a guy who, here in Chicago, we got a lot of owners who don't want to spend the money, man. Like, I just talked about how the Ricketts went cheap for, the few years after World Series. Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the White Sox, he acts like the Oakland A's here in Chicago, with how much the White Sox have not done enough to put something good out there for the fans. The NBA and the NFL are different because they do have salary caps. But I mean, it's a popular topic here in Chicago about how a lot of people don't like the owners, in terms of like, they just not doing whatever it takes to put a winning product out there for the fans. And like, I'm with them in a certain standpoint, because like I said earlier, like, you're going to charge all this money for fans to come watch your product, but you're not going to do whatever it takes to put a winning team out there. Then yeah, scream and yell all you want, in my opinion. Like, I don't blame you. So the only thing that solves that, if you're going to be cheap like that, the only thing that solves that is if you win. And you know what? I don't know if you checked it on Chicago sports of late, but no one's winning here, dude. No one has been winning of late. Like, the White Sox are coming off one of the worst seasons, one of the most disappointing seasons in the city's history. I mean, they were World Series contenders and they missed the playoffs. The Blackhawks are in a rebuild. The Bears, Justin Fields, God bless him, but I mean, it's not been great the last few years for sure. The future is bright, I think, but and then the Bulls, like, okay, they made the playoffs last year. They were building some real momentum into being a real, like, not, I wouldn't say a finals contender, but just being a playoff contender, which is a lot better than what it was 5 years prior. But now right now, at least they look like they might be trading guys off again. So it's not good times here in Chicago right now. So a lot of people are complaining about ownership, but not just, the Cubs, in a way, how things are playing out right now, the Cubs might have that brightest future of any team in the city right now, which, as a Cubs fan, and as the guy who does the Cubs podcast here at CHGO, like, it's better than not being that. So I'll take it. But yeah, I mean, I think it all just goes back to what, this whole thing with Steve Cohen, though, man. Like, that guy is doing whatever it takes to make the Mets fans excited, and to try and put a winner out there for Mets fans to be happy about. So I'm sure with all these taxes he's going to have to pay, and the luxury tax and all this, like, I'm sure he's going to charge a ton of money at these Mets games. But man, I don't blame him whenever he's breaking records with the amount of money that he's spending to just, make that baseball team better. And I commend him. So I know a lot of people might not agree with that take, but it's just the way I look at it. If you're gonna charge all this money for fans to come out there and watch your product that you're putting out there, you got to put a good product out there for people to want to keep coming back. And I think, in my opinion, especially in baseball, with there not being a salary cap, like, I think Steve Cohen's just making all these other owners look just like they don't give a crap about the teams that they own, and like, he's exposing them in a way. And like, I commend him for that, because it's been like this for a long, long, long time. So I hope down the line he stops spending money. So maybe some other teams can get some guys, but this whole thing with Correa is wild. Like I still can't believe it. Like the process of how it all happened, yesterday, the rumor that came out that he basically failed his physical, and not even 24 hours later, he's signing with the Mets. So I'm interested to hear the more news come out about that story, because to me right now, it's like either the Giants are going to really, really regret this, or the Mets are really going to regret this. And I don't even know if the Mets will regret this with the way that Steve Cohen spends money. If Correa isn't healthy or whatever in a few years, then who's to say he doesn't just pay the guy to go away and then do whatever? Because it's like the way he's spending money, he doesn't care how much money he has to pay in taxes or anything like that,
The number that came out today was Steve Cohen, and of course the Mets brass now have spent over $800 million on free agents this offseason, with the tax hit of over $100 million for the competitive balance tax, which is kind of baseball's salary cap there. Who's going to profit from it? Like you said, are the other 29 owners to share 50% or at least 50% of that revenue to go out to their teams, and if they use that for scouting, player development, things like the international signings, paying employees, keeping the lights on at the stadium, paying the bills. And I think you're right about your take, and we'll take a break here in just a second. But, the fans are the ones who end up kind of eating crow in the end, because the fans will pay the prices. I mean, sports is so much a drug out there too, no doubt, that we love it so much that we're going to continue to go see it live and root for our favorite teams. And honestly, I kind of take, and I want to ask you this, and we'll take a break after this, but about these other 29 owners, and let's talk about this dynasty, if you will, that the Astros are in now, this 6-year run of LCSs, 4 World Series, the pennants, the championships. I feel great about our owner. I love Jim Crane. I love when he bought the team in 2011. We had a guy, Jeff Luneau. Everybody knows about that and the whole scandal thing, which I'm not going to get into. But the bottom line is everybody was doing that at the time. People still do it even today. But still 2 championships, 4 pennants, 4 World Series, 6 straight league championship series. Something you never think you're going to see as a diehard fan. Do you think Houston is kind of the model for Major League Baseball now? Do you think other owners are going to go, man, through analytics and player development, we see what they're doing, so we're going to try to, I guess, mirror that? Or do you think, like you said, this is going to force owners to go, look, man, some of those small market teams, because we want to build more parity in the game, we want to be like the Philadelphia Phillies, get a wild card spot, get in the tournament, punch our ticket. We never know what's going to happen. A wild card team can get to the World Series just as a division winner can. Is Houston, the Astros, kind of the model franchise of MLB now?
Yeah, I mean, I won't lie to you. I mean, when the whole scandal thing happened with the Astros, I mean, I was just like everyone else, and they instantly became the villain, right? But I'll say this: I mean, they are everything that I wish the Cubs would have kept doing, because they both rebuilt at the same time. Like I remember when the Astros lost like 100 games, like multiple seasons in a row, right? The Cubs did that in 2012, and then they both reached like their peaks at the same time. Cubs in 16 and the Astros in 17. But the thing is that the Astros have been able to extend that period longer. And a lot of it has to do with their player development and scouting, because it's not, you lose Carlos Correa and then you put Jeremy Pena in there and he's winning World Series MVPs. Like that's something that I think every franchise definitely is striving to do. I do think that's all that still matters the most to players, because as much as I just said everything about Steve Cohen and the Mets spending all this money, like I would not be surprised if the Mets get in the playoffs and lose in the first round like they did this year, because that's baseball. Like it's all about who's hot at the right time. It's all about like, the players that are brought together, and how they mesh. Like it's a stat or something that you can't explain. It's not something that's in those Excel files that all these stat nerds that work in front offices are putting together, right? It's all about the guys that are put together and, trying to, I guess, estimate when these certain players are going to be good and all that stuff. So yeah, I think what the Astros are doing is still like the blueprint for other teams that are rebuilding right now. And as much as like I will say I did root for them in the World Series this past year. But over the last few years, I obviously was definitely not rooting for them. But I did root for them this year because I kind of was intrigued about this whole Houston against the world type situation. Also, I didn't want to see Kyle Schwarber win another ring with another team, but that has nothing to do with me not liking him. It had more to do with just like me not wanting to see him celebrate with another team. But yeah, I mean, what they did was insane, and even though they lost Verlander, like there's no way that an Astros fan is sitting at home right now and is worried about next season because they just seemingly just insert a new guy in and they figure it out. And like that's what happened with like I thought that they were going to take a big step back this past season because they lost Correa. Well, I didn't know anything about Jeremy Pena, you know what I mean? So I envisioned them inserting, someone in there to take over for Verlander. I know they've spent some money. That I saw they brought back Brantley, who's someone who I've always admired. I wish the Cubs would have found a way to get him since he was on the free agent market. But yeah, no, like I think the big thing with them is like that, and then they do have a set of core players like Alex Bregman and Jose Altuve are still there. They let Springer go and they let Correa go, but Bregman and Altuve are still there. And as long as you have those guys like that who have won and who have proven to be, staples of the organization, you got those guys, and then you mix in with other good players, you're going to figure it out one way or another. So, yeah, I mean, again, I think the Astros blueprint is still the best way to go in terms of long-term sustained success. I do think the Dodgers are a team like that as well. The only thing about the Dodgers is like they get to the playoffs, but they can't figure out how to get all the way except for in 2020. But I don't know about you, but I don't count that season. So
I don't either. I'm with you. It's like I don't count 2020. It was just such a blur on the map in the 60-game season there. The stats were kind of, like I said, out there. It was good to still have a season despite everything we went through at the same time. But I will say that I'm not counting a 60-game season compared to 162. And now I want to come back after this break. We'll talk about some of these rule changes that are going to go into effect. We'll still dive into some free agency too about who's kind of been winners of this offseason now that most of your top 20, 25 free agents are off the board. And, of course, now you'll be building, like I said, 99 days until opening day coming up. And, of course, a little bit maybe about the World Baseball Classic coming up there, starting up again for the first time in about 4 or 5 years too. More with Cody Delmendo at CHGO Sports out of Chicago. Check out the podcast anywhere you find podcasts and social media out there too. We'll come right back. A word from our friends over at Bangtail Whiskey. Check them out, bangtail.com, and, of course, easyliquor.com, the place to go to get that bottle sent directly to your door. More with Cody here and more Major League Baseball talk here on Talking Baseball with Brandon and Cody. Hang tight.
The Bangtail pour is comprised of a sweet corn mash base. The front has a subtle sweetness and not too sharp. It has notes of a medium char or white oak for a smoky flavor in the middle, and the tail has a super smooth and warm finish.
Go behind the scenes with some of the biggest artists in music today with the Backstage Pass, powered by the SportsGuysPodcast.com. Join Brandon Morrill and his co-host Kirsty Krause as they talk to rising stars and legends about their music careers. Listen to their latest tracks and learn fun facts about the men and women behind the music you love. And be sure to tune into the Backstage Pass Monday through Friday from 3:30 to 6:30, powered by the SportsGuysPodcast.com. And welcome into the Backstage Pass. And welcome back inside the SportsGuysPodcast.com. And, of course, talking baseball here. Good buddy Cody Delmendo, CHGO Sports. Check out the podcast out there. We'll have Cody on. Going into 2023, appreciate the time today, sharing a little baseball knowledge with us, too, and talking about this crazy free agent frenzy that's been going on this offseason, too. Looking forward to kind of seeing the remaining free agents come off the board and kind of seeing where some of these guys go, the Type B and Type C free agents. Let me ask you this a little bit as we're presented by our friends over at Bangtail Whiskey. Check them out, easyliquor.com for shopping there. This has been kind of crazy coming off this lockout. And, of course, people were always talking about, the 50-50 split and some of these rule changes had to go into effect, the universal DH, bigger bases, a pitch clock, things such as that nature. And now, you can see coming out of this lockout, it was never a financial problem that owners had, because my old saying is, and you'll probably agree with this, you're worth only what somebody will pay you at the time when it comes down to that. And I mean, all these 30 owners out there always had money, haven't lost money. Maybe they have. Yeah, any business, we're going to lose money. But in a billion-dollar industry like Major League Baseball, several billions of dollars, they have not been afraid to throw money around. I want to say I saw something where it's almost $2.5 billion worth of free agent contracts right now that have been thrown around in the last 4 weeks alone. And if you look at this, some of the guys went back to where they're comfortable with, a.k.a. Aaron Judge, the Yankees, 9 years and $360. But you see some guys, like you mentioned, Dansby, Trey Turner going to the Phillies, Xander Bogaerts. I kind of know what the hell Boston was doing. They've lost their mind. Like Kyle Bloom woke up in some like daze or something, and he didn't have a good night of sleep. He's like, you just let your core player get away to the San Diego Padres. And then I start thinking, like, what the hell the Padres are doing? But as fast as these guys, and it all started with Verlander, the first day of that winter meetings. I'm like, no, Houston's not keeping him. But then you just see this spearhead, Cody, of signings that have gone on these last few weeks, and over $2.5 billion thrown around Major League Baseball now. The game is healthy. Is there a free agent, or maybe two or three, that you can actually say they're going to make this team that much better due to the contract that the team gave them? Who would it be?
Well, I mean, for baseball's sake, I hope Aaron Judge's contract doesn't age badly. He's one of the faces of the game. Coming off a 62 home run season, the guy bet on himself, and he got paid pretty well compared to like what I guess the reported number was before the season. So yeah, 9 years, 360, maybe, in those later years. I think the big thing about those long contracts, it's those later years, after 7 to 9 years, those last 2 or 3 seasons, those players start to really trend down in terms of their, maybe not necessarily their full on production, but just like they start to break down and they can only do so much. Maybe they have to sit out more games, stuff like that. But he's someone that, like, if there's anyone I'm rooting for to for the sake of baseball, it's for Aaron Judge to continue on, what I think will be a Hall of Fame tenure. So he's one. You mentioned Bogaerts. I think I don't know if the Padres are going to regret it in the long term, but I also don't know if the same front office will be there at the time of when that contract ends. And the way that they're spending money, it's almost like they don't care. Because he was projected like 6 years, 150, 160. You got 11 years, 280. So a lot more money. Now, a lot of that money is spread out. Like AAV is around $25-26 million. So I guess it's, it's in terms of the average annual value, it's not too bad, but 11 years, a long time. The guy's 30 years old. I could see maybe 6 or 7 of those years being very highly productive years, but it's going to be interesting to see how those back end years work out. And, but at the same time, that signing did make sense to me, just because Machado can opt out after next season, and Juan Soto will be a free agent in 2 years. So that's kind of like an insurance. But to me, they should be invested. They should have been. To me, they should have been talking extension with Juan Soto. I mean, the guy's 23, 24 years old. A phenom's gonna, like, I don't know if he wants to just go to free agency, but like he's gonna get so much money. He's not going to get what Shohei Ohtani's going to get next offseason, but he's going to get a ton of money, in my opinion, and rightfully so. He's a really good baseball player. But yeah, I mean, I would say Bogaerts is probably the worst one of the one that's signed in terms of like what it could look like. But as far as like a guy that can significantly change a team right away, and maybe this is my bias, but I do think Swanson can be a guy that can help turn things around for the Cubs immediately. And a lot of it has to do with the players that the Cubs already have, but like, the Cubs have made the playoffs last 2 seasons. You insert a guy like that, and you make some other small moves like they have. He's the one who's going to be getting a lot of the credit if they do play well. So I it's kind of a tough look or a tough guess. Maybe Trey Turner is another one. I do think that Trey Turner contract is he's the one that that a lot of people wanted. He went to Phillies just because Bryce Harper's there, and their spring training facilities in Florida where he lives, and that was basically it. He took less money because the Padres offered him like $350 million too, and he still went to the Phillies. So I wasn't too upset that the Cubs didn't get him. It seemed like he wanted to go to the Phillies automatically. The reason that I didn't say Turner is because I don't believe in the Phillies. And now I've kind of told this to a few people. I haven't said this. I don't think I've said this in front of a microphone, but I think my hot take for next season is that the Phillies won't make the playoffs. Because they were a team that almost missed the playoffs this past year. But somehow, some way managed to get in and then just got insanely hot, and went all the way to the World Series. So, but adding Trey Turner to that squad definitely on paper makes them better. But they're not going to start the year with Bryce Harper. I think he's going to be on the injured list for at least a month, because he had to have Tommy John or whatever. But he's a position player, so it's I don't know. It's weird. I don't think he's going to be able to play the field at least for most of the year. So I don't know how much that's going to affect them. But one of the reasons that I'm down on them is like their minor league farm system is not nearly as good as a lot of teams. And I just told you about, the Astros and the Dodgers. Those are two organizations that develop talent very well. And the Dodgers, they've shown that they can do that and spend money. And even the Astros, I mean, they gave Jose Abreu that 3-year contract, and they've paid other guys as well. They paid Verlander. So the Phillies, while they're spending a lot of money, I don't know if they're going to be able to do what they did this past season again if they don't find a way to get some homegrown pieces to come up and really, contribute. And but we'll see. That's kind of like my hot take for next season. But yeah, as far as other guys that I think that can significantly change or help a team take that next step. I mean, Jacob deGrom, he's great. If he can stay on the field, he can really put that Rangers team into position to maybe, be in the playoffs. 5 years is a lot. Like it feels like a decade ago when that news dropped, but if he stays on the field, man, he's the best pitcher in baseball, in my opinion. And, if they get that on top of, what they added Seager and Simeon last year, they got some young guys coming up. Like, there's some optimism there in Texas. So maybe his signing could propel them into like being in the playoffs. But that American League West ain't going to be easy, obviously, as you know. So especially not even just the Astros, but even the Mariners. So that division's, kind of quickly becoming very, very competitive when, the last 5-6 years, it's really been the Astros. The A's were okay for a few years. But I'm sure as an Astros fan, you weren't really that afraid of the A's.
No. And I'll say this, DeGrom does make it. I'm going to see the Rangers in Arizona when I go out there for spring training 23 in Surprise. They're a Surprise Stadium. They share the complex with the Royals. And it's just kind of cool to see, a team that spent that money last offseason that was the Steve Cohen of last offseason. Chris Young, of course, the front office, guys like that get together. John Daniels, one of the best executives, I believe, in the game. Kind of take that same mentality last offseason. It didn't work out, Corey Seager, Marcus Simeon. But then you kind of bring in a Cole Calhoun, a John Gray. You added DeGrom. You trade for an Odorizzi. Your rotation, Martin Perez comes back. You've got enough now to at least show a little bit more competition. I'm not saying they're going to beat Houston here and there with the pitching Houston has. But to get it more competitive, like you said, great things there with the Angels, bringing in Hunter Renfroe, and just recently Brandon Drury got 2 years and 17 yesterday with Anaheim too as well. Shohei Ohtani, Mike Trout if they're healthy. Seattle too, Teoscar Hernandez, Colton Wong. This is going to be a great division. Some great managers. Dusty trying to chasing back-to-back championship too. Let me ask you about this, because I know that a big trade was made there just a few weeks ago back, I believe it was around December 12th, where Sean Murphy, speaking of the A's, gets traded in that multiplayer deal to Atlanta. I wasn't thinking, there were some rumors, going around here and there and reading stuff and articles in The Athletic and some other places out there, media outlets. Murphy would go to the Braves, and of course, all this package would come back. The A's would get younger, couldn't afford him, all that kind of stuff. Sean Murphy is a damn good hitter, I'm going to tell you, from the catching position. He calls games very well. His pitch framing is good to me. He works well with young pitchers. I thought, and I'm not the biggest fan, like most people down here, of Martin Maldonado, but I know he works well with the pitching staff. Can't hit the broadside of a barn. But I will say that Sean Murphy's a guy that would have been a good fit for Houston. I'm not saying they had the prospects to give up and do what Atlanta did, but because of that going there and William Contreras going to the Brewers, and you look at what the Brewers got back and a couple of minor league pitchers, the A's obviously got the big haul. Do we now see the trade market pick up more?
I hope so, because running out of free agents for the Cubs to sign. So I'm, I've been crafting up some trades in my own head. You want to talk about trade? Like, I'd love to see the Cubs slide in on the phone with the Red Sox for Rafael Devers if he becomes available, because story came out of ESPN yesterday that they're like galaxies apart on a contract extension, and based off everything we know, they traded Mookie Betts. They let Xander Bogaerts walk, which that one I kind of give him a pass for, because he made $120 million more and cut significantly more years compared to what the projection was. In a way, I can't fault them for that. But will they be able to keep Rafael Devers? I don't know, man. I don't know. And like with the way that the organization's moving for the Red Sox right now, it's screaming like 2021 Cubs for me. That's what it is. And when I say that is, Cubs traded Yu Darvish the offseason before the 2021 season, and they traded all those guys at the trade deadline, Rizzo, Bryant, and Baez. The Red Sox don't have nearly as many pieces as the Cubs did in 2021, but I just like that division's so competitive. It's so tough. Like, I don't think they're going to go into like a full-on rebuild, but it feels like they might if they can't get Devers extended, because after Devers, it's like, okay, you got an older Trevor Story, okay, that you signed last year, and then Kike Hernandez is there. They just signed that guy out of Japan, which you don't know what you're going to get. As someone who watched a guy from Japan this past year on the Cubs, Seiya Suzuki, like he's a rookie, like you just there's no expectation. Like, you're hoping that he just comes over and is and he's going to have his ups and downs, but he's a good player, and you hope that he really takes the next step in year two. And then their pitching is their pitching is not that great either. So I don't know what direction the Red Sox are going. So I'd love for the Cubs to dive in head first on Rafael Devers. I'd love to if they can get an extension with him, sign the moment that they trade for him, of course. But because there's only 1 year left on his deal. But as far as like other guys that might be a little bit more available or possible. I am surprised that Shohei Ohtani isn't on the market, because like, this is the way I look at it. He's going to be a free agent after next season. And if you can't get I don't know if you're going to be able to get an extension done with him. He's going to make more money than anyone else ever is. Like, I think he's going to get the first $500 million contract. That's what I would guess. And
he probably will. I agree.
And to me, get paid. Yep. And to me, he's worth it, because not only does he pitch like an ace, he's one of the better hitters in the game too, right? Like, he's totally worth whatever you have to pay for him. And I know the Angels have given out big contracts before. I mean, they gave Mike Trout that big contract. They have a bunch of contracts that haven't worked out for them. Anthony Rendon might be one of them. If the Cubs didn't have to move anything, which he has no real value right now, the Cubs could, slide in and maybe trade for Anthony Rendon and maybe change the scenery, can get him back to how he was playing with the Nationals. And if the Angels eat some of that money, but I just don't think the Angels are going to do that considering how they've been playing in free agency this year, or this offseason. But you kind of get what I'm saying. But this thing with Ohtani is like, okay, I don't think you're going to get the value for Ohtani at the trade deadline that you're going to get now.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how great he is. Like, with the way that teams are operating, like the Padres gave up their entire farm system for Juan Soto. Well, Juan Soto's 23 years old. Mm-hmm. All right. Shohei Ohtani's going to be 29 or 30 years old. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's a big difference. It just is. So, I've been really surprised that he's not on the market, and maybe it's just not being talked about. It would explode on baseball Twitter if that happened. But yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know what other big names out there that could be moved. But I think the Cubs have a trade in them somewhere. In terms of, and it's not a big one like that, but just something like if they miss out on like Michael Conforto, then maybe they make a trade for a hitter. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I just don't really know as far as like a lower tier name or anything like that. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to find out. I do think that the trade market really is going to heat up here over the next month, just because mm-hmm. a lot of the free agents are, all of them are off the board.
I think one of the teams that's going to be interesting to follow coming up there in that American League East, you talked about, two of them actually in that division too, that are getting better and better as each year goes by. One's the Baltimore Orioles, and I'll tell you, Brandon Hyde, 83 and 79 this year, to me, was definitely a top candidate for AL Manager of the Year too. If you look back at that too, I love the way this guy comes in, goes about his business, and of course, Mike Elias, their general manager / president of business, their baseball operations there, came from the Houston background. So he came for all the analytics and, of course, the scouting and player development we've talked so much about on this show, too. I know that there's a great young core to build around there. They take a flyer here and get some pieces. Michael Givens comes back, and you look at a Kyle Gibson coming there, too, that's going to add a little bit maybe to that rotation. But Adley Rutschman is just a freak of nature when it comes to hitting with power. Line drive guy, loves to hit for average, and got some speed for a catcher, can run a little bit, calls great games. But this Orioles team, as you know, Anthony Santander, Cedric Mullins, it's a team to keep your eye on. The other one I was going to mention was the Toronto Blue Jays getting Chris Bassett, kind of the under-the-radar move, 3 at 63, what he got paid to, and had a decent season with the Mets there last year. He's not your overpowering guy, but he's a finesse pitcher and works both sides of the plate and each quadrant of the strike zone to get the ground balls. And, of course, now going to the Toronto ballpark, which to me is a hitter's ballpark there at Rogers Center. So two teams to really, Cody, keep your eyes on in the Orioles that give the Yankees that run, I guess, if you will, again, for best first half and the second half. Because to me, unless the Red Sox do something else, it's kind of the garbage team of that AL East. The Orioles and the Blue Jays are catching the Yankees real fast, Cody.
No, I agree. I am a little surprised the Orioles haven't spent more money this offseason, just because they do have a nice young group of a nice young group of players, right? And being in that division that they're in, I expected them to, be bigger players in free agency, but maybe they make a big trade instead. I don't know. But also Toronto was a team I was high on this past year. Adding Bassett to go with that rotation of Gossman and the rest of those guys, that they are a team that I would say is like both those teams I would say are better than the Red Sox right now. The Yankees are going to, the Yankees haven't had issues making the playoffs. They're going to make the playoffs. It's just how will they play in the postseason, as you've happily seen it go to complete shit. But yeah, no, you make good points there on Baltimore and Toronto, especially Toronto. I think Toronto could maybe finally take that big step. I think Seattle is also a team that could do that as well. They finally got in the playoffs, broke that drought. Now can they get back there? and I like I love Julio Rodriguez. I think he's a stud. I think he's worth every penny that they gave him. It's going to look like a steal of a contract by the time it's over, I think. So yeah, a lot of those like mid-tier small market teams, like those three, they they have made some, they've developed well of late, and they've, I think the future is very bright for them.
Let me ask you about the South side here, because I'm going to go probably check them out at some point, spring training too. Pedro Grifol comes in, LaRussa's out. Of course, he was too old to manage anyway, at least by my standards ago. But you got Jerry Reinsdorf too at the same time. Looking back, they've been real quiet this offseason. A young nucleus there, Yohan Moncada, and of course now bringing in Andrew Benintendi. I've always appreciated this guy's game because he's a great contact hitter, average power. Not so much in maybe the home run category. When I say power, you get your home runs there kind of sprinkled in, but a lot of average on base percentage is high. The guys, WAR, wins above replacements, is up there too when it comes down to it, probably around a 5 or at least a 4.8. I love the moves. Mike Clevenger, just a stopgap guy in the rotation. But I'm a little bit surprised, Cody, that the White Sox haven't done more this offseason, considering, I guess, 2 reasons. One, you've got an owner that supposedly wants to win. And 2, he may not have Steve Cohen money, but he's got money to spend, and they're well below the luxury tax.
Oh yeah, no, and that's like this goes back to everything I said about the owners in this city, man. And I'll just say this, as knowing a lot of White Sox fans, they're not really surprised that they're not doing anything, because they're trained to be this annoyed and pissed off at ownership or front office, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, they're basically banking on guys having rebound seasons. Like Yohan Moncada, I mean, he was one of the top prospects in baseball. He was part of the Chris Sale trade. And I think his 2019 was probably his best season. He was a 4-WAR player in 2021. But last year, really, I don't know what happened, man. He really fell off. So like they're banking on him rebounding next season. They're banking on Eloy Jimenez staying healthy, which is something that he hasn't been able to do. When he is healthy, he's far and away their best hitter, in my opinion. They're banking on Luis Robert to, be that 5-tool MVP type player that they thought they signed internationally, which he certainly has the attributes to be able to do that, but he also has injury problems, or shown to have injury problems, and he just hasn't shown to be consistent enough to, really be able to be a guy that can carry a team. So they're banking on a lot of things, man. Like, and the thing that I guess makes them still a playoff contender is that they're just in a division that's not that good. Like the Tigers, I assume they're going, like, I don't think they're going to be tanking next year. I think they want to try and win, but they have so many issues there, so many bad contracts now after 1 year. Javi Baez's contract looks awful for them right now. How they got new front office, how are they going to turn things around quickly? I don't know. The Royals have some young guys, no doubt, but with the way that they operate, I don't know. Like I don't know. I don't know what you're going to get out of them. The Twins just lost Correa. Not that it mattered. He was there, and they still missed the playoffs. I'm waving at one of my friends. And then what do you call it? Oh, the Guardians. The Guardians, I mean, 90 wins last year, and they're supposed to win like, 70? That was like the projection, something like that. Like they weren't expected to do what they did. But the one thing I'll say about the Guardians is they're very similar to, like, in terms of player development, they're very similar to Astros, Dodgers, and other teams like that. Like they develop pitching very, very well. They had Corey Kluber. They let him walk. Okay, we got Shane Bieber. You know what I mean? Or they traded Corey Kluber and then they insert Shane Bieber. They have other young pitchers that are very, very good. Carter Hawkins, who's the GM for the Cubs now, he came from the Guardians organization, and he's kind of brought that mentality over to the Cubs. That's why the Cubs pitching infrastructure and pitching talent prospects that they have are actually looking very, very good. And that's why I say that about the Guardians, because he's brought that to the Cubs now. Guardians, honestly, they might be the best. They might be the biggest scare to me in that division. But for the White Sox, the Guardians, I know that the Guardians have spent some money this offseason, more than like what they normally spent. And, they gave Jose Ramirez all that money, which deservingly so. I think he's one of the most underrated players in baseball. But the White Sox, like, they could be doing so much to really put themselves over the top in this division. They should have done it last offseason. They didn't do it. So yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I'll be honest with you. I'm feeling good about my team, and if I'm a Sox fan, I'm just miserable.
Pissed off, no doubt about it. I tell you what, man, it's been fun breaking down some baseball with you this past hour, my friend. Looking forward to doing this again. Appreciate you dropping us a vine. Appreciate the knowledge, and definitely go give him a follow at CHGO Sports. Cody Delmendo here on the sportsguyspodcast.com, our final show of 2022. Cody, great to catch up, my friend, and we're going to do this again coming up in 2023. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to you and your family.
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you. Make sure if you're a Chicago sports fan, make sure you're following CHGO Sports. We are definitely all about the fan perspective. It's a lot different compared to other media outlets here in Chicago. So thanks again for having me on, man, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, no doubt. And some people like yourself, find us on Twitter and social media out there. You may not like my takes when I bash my hometown Houston Astros, but just know these caps, they don't give them out for free. Trust me, you have to earn this World Series champion of 2022. And I really feel like, too, like you said, the window's still open. It's going to be competitive. It's the greatest game out there, too. No pun intended if people love the other sports more. But I love a game where you put 9 players out there and you never know where that little 6-ounce piece of rubber is going to wind up out there when it comes to baseball. 99 days until opening day. And, of course, even shorter than that when pitchers and catchers report. Full squad workouts begin. And, of course, I'll be out in Arizona, my friends. So any kind of content I get out there or player interviews, you guys can feel free to share them out there at CHGO Sports and do that, because I love that you're saying the fan perspective. That's why we do what we do, because we have a passion for sports and we want to hear fans' opinions. And I want to kind of sit there and I want to talk sports with them, not at them. And you've heard that expression before, is just enjoy it and lash out and do it out there too. We'll see you guys coming up in 2023. Bree Bagwell and a whole bunch of other great shows are coming up here. Dylan Carmichael's going to stop by on the Backstage Pass and a whole lot more. So be on the lookout for that. We'll see you guys in 2023. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and happy New Year. Enjoy it with the ones you love. Hug them tight, and always tell them the show here is presented by our friends over at Bangtail Whiskey. The one, the only Cody Delmendo of CHGO Sports. We'll see you guys in 2023.